this is session 1 of the Icelandic yoke sweater knit-along class that I like to call the chicken sweater class, because I got the idea. For this sweater from my chickens, because I wanted to make something with the chicken. Yeah, with the chickens' designs and colors. So this was first called chicken sweater class, and then I decided when we were going to start, looking for signups and advertising it, we better call it Icelandic sweater, yoke sweater, because people know what that is, but they might not know what a chicken sweater is. So, but the colors that you got were, inspired by our chickens. So I'm going to share my screen with you so I can run a slideshow. We can go over a bunch of stuff. So you can know what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks, and actually into October, because we're going to meet every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. My goal is that many of you will be able to knit a whole sweater by the time we finish in October. Now, I know everybody's got different schedules and different amount of times they can knit and different sizes of sweaters we're making. But I just thought as much as we can knit together during the time, the better it would be. And I know I've taken classes before at local yarn shops where we knit a sweater together, and it was a little bit tighter schedule than what we're doing here, because we met every week for 4 weeks or something, and we tried to finish our sweater. So I think we'll have plenty of time. But again, there's no requirement for you to finish by the time a certain date comes. We will work together as that goes. So let's see here. Can you see my full screen slides now?
Yes.
Okay. So we're working, you've gotten a copy of my book, Ethnic Knitting Exploration, and that's got lots of extra information in it about designing your own sweater using traditional techniques. And we're going to talk about that and some other things today. I am sending you a pattern. So you're going to be getting a PDF of this pattern today when I send it out with the link to this video. And the pattern has these charts that I made that are the chicken motifs. So there's little chicken. With chicken feet, 2 different sizes of chicken feet. And it's got basically, there we go. It's basically just the text of line by line what to do, so that you have that, but it's going to be our baseline. You can, of course, pick your size and knit exactly from that pattern if you want. But that's not the main goal of this class. The main goal of this class is to look at sweater shapes and sweaters that we have that we like, that fit us well, and to create something that is customized as much as we want to. So this is a basic sweater, a drop shoulder sweater, and you can see it's kind of boxy. Well, it's very boxy. There's all straight lines. The shoulders go straight out. If you've made one of these, you probably know the shoulder seam comes, down here on you. So this is like just sweater 101, a basic shape. What we're going to be doing is a yoke sweater. And you can see here how the shape is different in the major way, which is that there is no shoulder seam, and the shoulders slope, so they, curve like your body does. And we can do additional shaping to this sweater, but this picture here, the body is just straight, and the sleeves are just, the standard trapezoid. What's special about the yoke sweater is that it's made with sections where you knit plain for a while, and then you do some decreasing, and then you knit plain for a while, then you do some decreasing. And so it's pretty easy as far as shaping the yoke goes, and you can pick any kind of pattern or design you want to put in those straight sections, and you decrease. So like the first time we knit a few inches, then we decrease 25% of the stitches all on one round. Then you knit a little bit more, you decrease 33% of the stitches on the second decrease round, and then on the third one you decrease 40%. So this is sort of like a pie shawl in reverse, but for shaping around your neck. It's not exactly a pie shawl because we're not going, pie shawl in the center has nothing. And of course, here we have a neck opening. So the exact numbers, if you're working from the pattern, I worked out all the exact numbers for you that you can follow if you want to do it that way. But what we're going to be looking at, if you want to do some modifications, is this percentage system. So this is part of the section on the percentages from my book, Ethnic Knitting Exploration. And it just shows you how the body or the bust chest measurement is what we consider 100%. And so however many stitches you have in that is your main number of stitches. And then how different parts relate. It's a number of stitches, but also number of inches or centimeters around. You can use either kind of measurement you want. So if you look at this, the neck, for example, the neck opening is usually 40 to 45% of the size of the whole body. The top of the sleeve is usually 35 to 40% and so forth. So that's just an overview of that. And we can use these numbers later if you want to customize and you're not sure how to do it. So we'll be talking about an overview of everything this week. And then in the following lessons, we're going to break it up as we go through the sweater for the body, the sleeves, the yoke, and then the neck and finishing. So we'll go into a lot more each of the sections when we get up to it. But I don't expect you to remember all that from today. So this is just an overview of how this works. Now, I didn't make these percentages up. They come from two sources. One is Knitting in the Old Way by Priscilla Gibson Roberts. This is one edition of this book. There was another edition that had a different cover. But you can see that it's very similar to what I have in the drawing, a little bit different, but basic same idea. And she's written in the lines around the yoke, little formulas like y1 minus y equals this, and y2 minus y. And it's like, okay, yeah, that hurts my head. It's like a geometry problem. But really, there is a little bit of that going on here. But that just gives you one source of where this information comes from. And then the other one that's more well known is Elizabeth Zimmerman. And you may have heard of EPS, or Elizabeth's percentage system. It's more well known. It's basically the same numbers and same overall structure as the one Priscilla Gibson Roberts did and the one I did, but explained in each our own way. So these are two different descriptions, and I'm going to, you can see I've taken a picture of the 2 pages from the books that I put in here. I'm going to send you those 2 pages in the email, or I might send you a link to this whole PowerPoint, because then you can look at everything again. But I want you to have these 2 pictures so that you can look at these if you want to compare and just see different ways that it's explained. But you can see the shapes are really the same, and there's just different things highlighted in arrows and explaining different places and so forth. Okay, so this is something to help you figure out what size you want to make. What is the ease? The ease is how much bigger than your body the sweater is. So I do not like clothes that fit. I always buy clothes that are too big. I've always worn clothes that are too big my whole life. I like oversized sweaters. I buy jeans that I can put on and off without buttoning them, unbuttoning them. So I usually make a loose fit or oversized fit on my sweaters. The one I'm making for Katie Sullivan, who is at Bobolink Yarns, who's was responsible for working with the farm and the mill to get our yarn made for us. She likes fitted things, so I'm going to be making hers with a very close fit. She doesn't want any extra ease. She likes it to really be snug. She wears her sweaters for working. She doesn't want them to catch on anything, and so I'm making her snug. So you can decide, and I suggest you decide based on something you have that you love, either a sweater you made, a sweater you bought, even a sweatshirt, because a sweatshirt's thick, you know, kind of same thickness as a sweater. And we'll use that for a basic judgment of how you want this to fit. And you might like different fits for different styles of things, right? Not everyone wears all their clothes too big like I do. And the tightness of a sweater sometimes is also tied to how long it's going to be. Now, excuse me? Question? No? Okay. Feel free to interrupt me with questions if you have any. This yoke sweater and the pattern I sent you is somewhere waist to hip length. And that can be, you know, tight or loose, however you want. If you're making a tunic, you know, a really long sweater, usually it's looser. And usually short crop tops are tighter because otherwise, you know, they just come up and expose you when you move. But basically a general overview is if you look at stuff in your closet, you may find that the longer the sweater is compared to your body, the looser the fit is. So it's something to keep in mind if you're going to adjust the length. And we're going to talk about waist shaping because if you, well, a couple people asked me about it specifically, but I wanted to talk about anyway. If you look at the drawings that we looked at already, like I said, the bodies are just straight. And I'm fine with that. I don't care if a sweater, you know, is shaped with my waist shaping or bust shaping or anything, but we can do some shaping to make the waist snugger and the bust bigger. And if it's a short sweater, we would normally start with a smaller waist. If it's going to come just to our waist, we would start with a smaller waist and add some increases up to our full size circumference for the bust. And if it's a longer sweater down to your hips, you usually start wider for your hips, then you decrease, and then you increase. So I'm going to try to see if you can see my body here. Can you see my body in the video?
Yes.
Okay, so you should be able to see. Let me stop the share for a minute to make sure that everyone can see my, except I don't see where my mouse is. I have no mouse cursor, so. All right, so gonna have to, I don't know if I'll be able to stop this share since I have no mouse cursor showing up.
You could try escape to stop the sharing.
I tried that, nothing happened. No, it just stopped my slideshow from showing, but that's good. My cursor came back. Okay, so you can pin me or set your thing to show speaker view, so I'll be bigger. But so if you just want waist shaping, like on this shirt, you start here with your hip if you're doing a hip length, and you'll decrease right at your side seams to be smallest point here, and then increase back up to your bigger size for your bust. But if you want more of shaping just for the front, since many of us have busts, not chests in this class, maybe all of us, you can do the shaping here. So you can do some decreases right here and then increase back, and then it becomes like a bust start instead of side seam waist shaping. But it gets the same basic effect. And if you want to do that and you need more information on it, I can certainly help you work out exact numbers for what you're doing. So we can change a decent amount of stuff as we're working on the sweater from this pattern. So in addition to the length and the waist shaping or lack thereof, we can change the neck shaping. One thing we can do is we can do some short rows when we get way up here. Now this is, going to be at the end of the class, so we'll go over it again. But you can do some short rows on the back up here to raise the back neck. Because a lot of times on sweaters, the back neck, especially if you're doing like a crew neck or a turtleneck, you want the back neck to come all the way up to here, but you don't want the front neck opening. If you're adding a turtleneck, that's the extra part that you put on later. So you can change that shaping. We can also lengthen the front or the back by doing short rows at the beginning of the yoke. So I found that when I make a cardigan in this shape, I need to lengthen the back because of the way the cardigan fits on me and the way the neck is shaped, the back always rides up on me, which is really weird because I have like more body in the front. On a pullover, I wouldn't necessarily have the same thing, maybe just the way I wear them. But you could add extra length in the front, especially if you're making like a waist length one and you want the front and back both to come to your waist. We can add some short rows in the front. So if you have a bigger bust, you can have the front be longer. So we'll go over that when we get up to that point as well. And then, of course, the waist shaping, as I said. And then there's all other kinds of things that you can do with sweaters that we're not going to really get into. If you want to make some really funky design elements and you know how, go for it. But we're going to stick to pretty basic shaping with some modifications for fit. So this is a schematic from a pattern I found on the internet, and it just shows you in a different way the shaping. And you can see on this one, they did a little bit of decreasing right under the yoke to take some of the bulk out of the underarms. So can you see that? Instead, there's no waist shaping. It's a basically straight body, but they've decreased a tiny bit. This is centimeters, so it's not as much as it looks like. They decreased a few centimeters right before they started the yoke, just to make it so it's less baggy in the underarms. This one is the same kind of diagram where you can see how it has some waist shaping. So it's widest at the hip, comes in for the waist, and then comes out again for the bust. So those are, all things that are really easy to change. Really easy to change. I wanted to talk a little bit about the ribbing at the bottom, because if you look in the book by Priscilla Gibson Roberts and Elizabeth Zimmerman, and I probably put the same thing in my book, because I wrote it I wrote it in the mid 2000, before 2010. So styles change all the time. But in their books, which were written even before that, like in the 1990s or 80s, they said to make the ribbing 90% of the stitches and then increase to your full amount for the sweater body. And that really draws the ribbing in a lot. And today, most styles are not done that way. The ribbing, if you put ribbing at the bottom, draws in enough by itself to give you a shape to the sweater without using fewer stitches. So that's a choice you can make. Also, if you don't want it to be pulling in at all at the bottom and you want it to hang straight, you could do seed stitch or moss stitch or something like that, that gives you mix of knit and pearls without pulling in the way ribbing does. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so when we change the length of the sweater, if we're just changing it with no waist shaping or anything, we just make the body as long as we want to the underarms. But if we're changing the length of the sweater and we have waist or bust shaping, then we need to plan in advance so that we know where the waist part's going to fall on our body. So you have to think about that ahead of time if you're going to put in waist shaping How long do you want your sweater to be? How long from the hemline up to your underarm, and where in that point does your waist fall? Because we're all different. So I am about the same height as my sister, but if we stand next to each other, her waist is like 3 inches higher from the ground than my waist is. So her legs are much longer and her torso is much shorter. So if I was making a sweater for her and putting waist shaping in, it would not be in the same position that I would put waist shaping in for myself. So this image comes from Amy Herzog's website. She's got a lot of good tips on customizing sweaters and so forth. Again, it's not really complex what we're talking about here. A little bit of waist shaping is not that serious, but you still want it to fit right. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to show you some necklines. The pattern that, yeah, aren't these pretty? These are random images from Ravelry. So you might want to do a search on Ravelry for Icelandic yoke sweaters, because you can get all kinds of ideas of how you might want to customize the patterning on yours. And I'm giving you some charts. There's more charts coming up that are in the book. Go ahead. Question? No? Okay. But you can see here that when you get to the top of the yoke shaping, you can leave it really wide, as in the first one with the gray and white and the chevrons. They have almost left out that last decrease round so that the neck is really open. So if you want to really open the neck, we can do that. The second one on below that, the neck is really decreased a lot because it's a turtleneck, which of course then the neck collar part when you put on fits very close to your neck. And the two on the right are in between. So the top one has like a standard crew neck with an inch or inch and a half of ribbing. And the bottom one is just stockinette stitch and letting it roll. So, and you can also see different ideas of how to use your colors. So I've sent you 3 colors of yarn. The main color for the body is the one that's heathery or marled. That's originally it was white and gray, and then it's dyed into your color. You have 3. You have marled that's dyed, and you have some solid that's dyed. They're very close. You might have to look in a really bright light to see the difference, especially if you have the blue and purple colorway, because it's so dark. But you should have some dyed that's marled, and some dyed that was dyed on a plain white yarn. And then you have plain white yarn. So the main amount, you have the most of the marled yarn. So that will be the main color for your body and sleeves. And then the other 2 are patterning colors. Of course, you can do whatever you like with it. So for example, in my mind, the yoke is white with chicken feet made in the orange or purple color, or little chickens or little geometric motifs. But you might decide you want the whole sweater. Like this first one in the picture, she doesn't change the background color on the yoke, adds the white for the patterning. And then the one next to that with the crew neck, she's actually changing, using all 3 colors there. She's got 3 colors. So you can do different things like that. And again, we're going to do some swatching this week where you can try the colors together in some of the charts. That can help you think about it. But this is not going to come till our 3rd class, because we're going to do the body and the sleeves first, which means you have to think about, and you should have enough of the patterning colors if you want to do some patterning on your cuffs. So this is an interesting design. You can see it's got ribbing at the bottom. It's about waist length, maybe a little bit below her waist, right? But she did Fair Isle on the cuffs, and it looks like they just roll on the edge. There's no ribbing, but she did ribbing and no patterning at the bottom of the sweater. And I know a lot of women don't like patterning at the bottom of the sweater because we feel like it draws attention to the width of our hips. So that's up to you. But you can add patterning to the sleeves, which I actually really like to do that, to add patterning to the sleeves. What's good about that in what we're doing is if you add patterning to the sleeves, that gives you an extra chance to get your Fair Isle gauge worked out before you're working on the yoke. Because a lot of knitters, including me, have to use a different size needle for the color work than we use for the single plain knitting. And by figuring that out on your sleeves, you get ahead of the game and you're not having to potentially rip out part of your yoke. I'd rather rip out the cuff of a sleeve than part of the yoke where I've got 200 and something or 300 stitches, because when you combine your body and your sleeve, you got a lot of stitches when you start that yoke. Another thing I want to point out here is most of these are in all stockinette stitch all over the body. I hate knitting plain stockinette stitch, but I wouldn't want to add like too much of a pattern stitch, too much of a texture stitch to this sweater, because you want it to be, design wise. It would look funny if the body was really textured and then the color work was all smooth, or at least I think it would look funny. But I might do is like on every fourth row, do every sixth stitch as a purl, and put in just something like that, just to make it not plain stockinette. So that's something you can do if you want to. Just throw a few pearls in. Or I don't know if you're familiar with the Norwegian sweater. You know how they have that lice pattern where every here and there they have a white stitch on the black? You could do that here by just throwing a purl in. Like I said, every fourth row, every sixth stitch. And then on the next fourth row, you can offset them so they don't line up in straight columns. You could do something like that if you're like me and you just hate doing a giant whole body of a sweater in stockinette stitch. Okay, here's another one that has a little bit of patterning at the bottom of the sweater. So this is a guy sweater. So men's sweaters are usually down to the hip. And it has a little bit of patterning at the bottom of the body that matches what's at the bottom of the cuffs. And then, more elaborate patterning at the yoke. And so just wanted to show you that. So if you go on Ravelry and search for Icelandic yoke sweater, you can just look for all kinds of ideas. Now there's two kinds of sweaters. If you notice these ones that I'm showing you, they have like horizontal patterns. There's another kind that has vertical patterns, where it's all pre-charted and the decreases are worked into the chart. That's not how I wrote the pattern for the sweater that you have. I did it for individual horizontal patterns. But you can look at, if you fall in love with that other idea where it has like wedges that shape from the neck, it is included in the book, Ethnic Knitting Exploration, how to do that kind. And I'm happy to work with anyone that wants to talk about it if for some reason you just really fall in love with something like that and you decide you want to do those instead of the horizontal bands. You have to pay more attention because your chart's changing and your number of stitches changes a lot, whereas the way we're doing it in the pattern, you only have those 3 decrease rounds. But either way, it's not incredibly difficult, just more attention. Okay, so this week we're going to make swatches. We're going to make a plain swatch and a color work swatch. So you want to see what gauge you get, and I have a gauge in the pattern. I think it's 20 stitches and 28 rows, standard worsted weight gauge. But you want to make this swatch, and then you want to see if you get the gauge, but you also want to see if you like the fabric, because we all have different tastes. So some of us might want, our knitting to be a little tighter or a little looser because we like the way that yarn feels knit at a certain gauge. So that's another reason to get the gauge swatch. So I'm going to tell you the story I always tell. Some of you probably heard it before, but one of my first sweaters I knit, I bought the yarn. It said, this is worsted weight yarn, 5 stitches per inch. I had a pattern in a book. It said use worsted weight yarn, 5 stitches per inch. Here's the gauge swatch, 5 stitches per inch. Size 7 needles, 5 stitches, everything, 5 stitches per inch. I made my beautiful gauge swatch. I made my tested of the stitch pattern, everything, 5 stitches per inch. It was so nice. And my sweater came out beautifully. My hands hurt a little bit because it was cotton, which is, can be hard to knit. But when I finished, my sweater was so stood up by itself like a piece of armor. Now, I didn't have enough experience to know from the swatch, but that I was supposed to check, what does it feel like? Do I want to make a sweater that feels like this? I didn't know anything but count the number of stitches. So I made this beautiful sweater. I wore it about 4 times. It really wasn't comfortable. It was cotton, but it was, thick and stiff. So it was just, it ended up being a reject. But I learned a lot. So something good came of it. And it was inexpensive yarn, so I didn't waste, $300 or anything like that. So I want to talk about the swatching. For this, we want to swatch in the round because most of us get a different gauge swatching stockinette stitch in the round versus back and forth, because our purl gauge is often a little bit different than our knit gauge, or the way they combine changes the gauge. So you can cast on enough stitches to go in their little circle on double points or magic loop, or you can knit a flat swatch and on double pointed needles and kind of do it like a giant I-cord. So you knit across one row, then you slide back to the other side, pull your yarn across the back, but leave it really loose, and go again. So you're knitting all right side rows. I personally would rather knit a swatch in the round, but that's a cheater. That's a little cheater thing if you don't want to do it. You can make it like an I-cord with 40 stitches, but don't pull the yarn tight across the back, leave it loose. That makes it easy to count your rows too, because you have a loose strand of yarn across the back for each row. So if you have trouble counting your row gauge, you might want to try that. But we want to swatch in the round so we get the right gauge that's going to match what we knit for the sweater. Okay. So yeah, this is an ugly sweater. Okay, I know that. But I liked how it had the when I was looking on for whatever I searched for on Google, it had the chest measurement, the arm measurement. What happens if the gauge that you like on your yarn is a little bit off from the pattern? Well, you can go up or down a size in the pattern, and we can figure out like, oh, if I go to the size medium and my gauge is 5 1/4 stitches per inch, what size is that going to come out? I can help you figure that out if you don't know how to do it. But that you can do that up or down a little bit. Go up or down a size in the pattern to make it match your gauge and the size you want. I don't suggest doing that if your gauge is really far off, but if you're off a 1/2 stitch per inch or 1/4 stitch per inch, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes a big difference when you're talking about 100, 200 stitches, right? Yeah. Yep. That can make a big difference in the fit. So count those 1/4 and 1/2 stitches when you measure your gauge, as close as you can. That's why we measure over 4 inches, not over 1 inch, because if you have those 1/2 and 1/4, 4/4 in the 4 inches adds up to an extra stitch. That way you don't have to actually measure 1/4 of a stitch. By measuring 4 inches, you get that incorporated. It's much more accurate than trying to measure 1 inch. Okay, so that's it on that. Of course, if you want to start completely from scratch, you can go into the Ethnic Knitting Exploration book, and after the pages where there's a drawing of the sweater, there's actually a spreadsheet in the book where you can fill in all your measurements and your gauge, and you can work out your own custom sweater, from scratch. It's basically the same instructions that are in the pattern, but you're using your own numbers, not starting with the numbers that are predefined by me or another designer. I'm happy to help anyone that wants to do that rather than work from the pattern. If you need any help figuring out numbers, we can do it together. So what I'm hoping that you'll do this week is go through the pattern that I'm going to send you, go through the chapter on the Icelandic sweater in the Ethnic Knitting Exploration book. Look on Ravelry, look at the charts that are included in the book and the ones in the pattern. Make some swatches, and then come next week, in 2 weeks rather, come in 2 weeks with any questions you have, and then ready to cast on for your body. So, but we'll go over any questions you have from this week's stuff before we cast on. These are the chicken charts that I included in the pattern. Those are the ones I'm going to knit in the sweater that I make. So I want to have it really be a chicken sweater with little chicken feet and little chickens in the yoke. I think I might do the small chicken feet around the cuffs. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to have to do my gauge swatch and see how tall these patterns come out and then decide what I want to do. I think any of them will fit for most of us in the different parts, but we need to check. All right. And then in the Ethnic Knitting Exploration book, there's another few pages of charts. And of course, you probably all have other knitting books and patterns and stitch libraries. So any patterns that are repeats of 6, 8, 10, 12 stitches, we can work those into the yoke if you have something custom that you want to do. So this is in the book, so don't try to read it all right now. And when we can talk about it whenever we need to. We will definitely go over this in detail when we get to the yoke. But if any of you are going to do patterning in puffs or at the bottom of the sweater, we can talk about it then too. In the pattern, you might have a number of stitches that is not the multiple that you need for the chart you pick. So say you have a 12 stitch repeat. What this here says is you need to have 216, 240, 200, your stitch number total has to be divisible by 12. So your chart fits in all the way around. Actually, it doesn't. You could have half a chart at the end, but we don't tend to like that. So we're going to round it up or down. So say you had 216 stitches. Well, if your next pattern's a multiple of 10, you would go up to 220 because that's closest. You could go down to 210, but you need to have a multiple of 10. So you're going to do a little tweaking in between the horizontal patterns. Another thing you can do is actually rechart your pattern and make it fit in a multiple of 6 or 12 or 10 or whatever you have. So there's a little section in the book with some examples of how I took this little zigzag pattern and I redid it to fit in different multiples where I still wanted a zigzag, but how can I make a 12 stitch repeat zigzag or an 8 stitch? So you can get some graph paper and do that too if you want to modify something to fit in the number of stitches you have. So you can read through that if you think you're going to want to do that. And the last thing I want to talk about before we just do more questions and stuff is if you want to make a cardigan, you have two options. You can certainly make a cardigan with me. The first option on the upper left of this, it doesn't show a yoke sweater, but you can do this with a yoke sweater, which is you just basically make a pullover and then you cut it open in the front and add button bands. So that is one option. If you would like to do that, you don't even have to decide if you want a cardigan till you're finished.
Wow.
So the other way is for the yoke sweater, you can knit back and forth. We just change the end of the round from being like the side to being the center front, and you can knit back and forth. Then you don't have to cut it open. But of course, I don't think many of us would choose that option because we're doing color work, and that means you'll have rows where you're purling with two colors. So I'm guessing that anyone that wants to make a cardigan in this class. We'll just follow along with what we're doing as a pullover. And then at the end, we will go over how to steek it and cut it open. And if you've never done that before, we will use one of your swatches to practice on, because it's the first time is really, really scary. And I don't suggest you do the first time on your sweater. I suggest you do it on something you don't care about. You won't mess it up, you won't ruin it, but you still need to have the, not do it on the sweater first. I think it's Elizabeth Zimmerman that said, Zimmerman is the one that said when she first did this, she had to lay on the floor and put a cold compress on her head after she was finished, because it was so stressful cutting the knitting. Yeah. But, she did it and we do it. And it's the yarn you have, because it's farm wool, it's not superwash, it's not over processed. You'll notice it feels kind of sticky, which is good. The stitches stick together, the wool fibers stick together. It does not want to unravel or fall apart. So in the old times, in say Norway or Finland or different places, if they knit a sweater with sticky wool like that, they might cut it without even securing it. We're going to sew it or crochet it or something so it's secured before you cut it, if any of you decide to do that. So you don't have to panic about that. All right, so now, if you do make a cardigan, the last thing is you may have to do some fudging on centering your patterns. And anyone who wants to do the cardigan, let me know and I'll help you with that. Well, basically, because say when you're cutting it open, you want to make sure that you don't necessarily cut it in the middle of a pattern, or this might be a better example, this one here. So if you look on the left, the way this pattern is set up for knitting in the round, it has a vertical column that's only on one side. But if you were knitting a cardigan, when you came around to the other front, you'd want to end with the vertical column so it matched up. So you add it to the chart on the other side. Basically, you're just drawing the repeat in a different spot to make it fit better if you're knitting back and forth, or so that it lines up on the sides of where you're going to cut, so you don't have to cut like in the middle of a chicken. We don't want to cut a chicken in half. We want one chicken here and one chicken here on the other side. So anyone who wants to do a cardigan, let me know. Next week, you have plenty of time to think about it. If you're not putting any patterning at the waist or hip at the bottom, you don't even have to think about it for like 4 weeks till we get to the yoke, because the body's going to be plain and it doesn't matter. The most important part is right here, let me show you. When the first time I took a knitting class, the teacher said, if you don't have a mistake and it's not right here, don't worry about it. No one will see it. But, we don't want to cut a chicken in half, right in the middle of our boobs. So we'll work on that. We'll work on that. Now, I want to show you just one more thing. I'm going to share with you again. Okay, let me share this. I just want to show you something in the Ethnic Knitting book, what it looks like if you decide to do the sweater completely on your own and start from scratch. Okay, so let's see, where is it? Preview, yes, okay. So can you see this now? This is the pages from my book. So this is the picture that I sent you guys that I colored in different ways for the colors of yarn and so forth. So in the book, starting on page 93, you've got all the basic info like you would have if you're reading a pattern, but for you to customize yourself, what kind of knitting needles, what size, your stitches and gauge. That's stuff that you would have in the pattern that I'm going to send you, but you can also make it up yourself here. So there's a little bit of that. Then you have this picture which is a little bit more complicated than the one I showed you before, because it includes the basic steps for knitting the sweater. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've knit yoke sweaters before, so I can actually knit one just from this page. I fill in my numbers and I know how to do that, and I can knit from this page, but I don't expect anyone else to be able to do that. So what I've included here is basically a spreadsheet where you put in your gauge, your measurements, and then tells you how to figure each one out. I know it's a lot of little arithmetic. You can use a calculator if you decide to do it. And then when you get down here, these are the same steps. Cast on and knit your ribbing. You see this B with the star. You can go back up to your little spreadsheet and you find the B with the star, and that's the number you need to fill in there. And so you can write in your numbers all here, and you still end up with a completely written out step-by-step pattern, only it has your numbers in it. So if you decide that working from the pre-created pattern isn't going to get you what you want, we can work together on this. So look over that. If you don't want to look over it and you want to work directly from the pattern that you'll get from me this afternoon, totally cool. There's no reason to do this if you don't want to. So that's basically what I wanted to show you to get ready for next week. And again, you'll be reviewing stuff in the book, reading through the pattern, and doing some swatches. And then next week, you can ask me any questions about that, and then we'll go and cast on. And anyone who wants to do a cardigan or anything special at the bottom of their sweater, because we looked at ribbing. Some people didn't do ribbing in some of the samples. We'll get you all started on your body, and we'll decide if you want to do waist shaping. We can get all of that written down so that after next week's class, you'll be ready to knit the body of your sweater. So does anyone have any other questions or anything you want to talk about now?
I popped in oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering with the swatches. So we should use the yarn that you gave us, use the right colors, like the Heather one for the body swatch, and then we'll get the 2 other ones and just make up one of the charts that you provide us this afternoon for the swatch for the chart.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Because we want to make sure that we like how this yarn comes out with the size needles and the kind of needles. Sometimes the kind of needles makes a difference. You might like metal needles better than wooden needles on this yarn or something. So and some people get a different gauge if they change to a different kind of needle. So yes, I want you to work with this yarn so you know
and we won't run out of
that
yarn.
you're getting.
I guess that's my worry.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And then
exactly.
The pattern tell us,
and also go ahead.
Does the pattern tell us like what size needles would probably be best with this type of yarn? Like size 8 needles?
It's just, it's a regular pattern. Like, it's got everything in it. The gauge, the basic gauge, the size needles to start with, and so forth. I think it's a US 7 because it's kind of worsted weight. But if you know that you're a loose knitter, you might want to start a size smaller. If you know you're a tight knitter, you might want to start a size bigger. But yeah, just like it's a complete pattern. Yeah, so you don't have to make up anything from scratch if you don't want to.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Donna, I missed like the first 5 minutes because I was running between things, but you said not next week, but 2 weeks from now. I just want to make sure I have the right dates on my calendar. So next week we're not meeting, but 2 weeks from now we are?
Right. We're meeting every other week. So the reason is I want you to have 2 weeks to work on everything, because I know like we have jobs, we have kids, we have summer vacations, we have back to school coming, whatever. I want to have 2 weeks between each part. So this part's mostly brain work and some swatching, but the next parts you're going to have a body to knit or sleeves to knit or a yoke to knit. So it's quite a bit of knitting. And I thought spreading it out 2 weeks apart would give everybody more realistic time for getting all that knitting done.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, some of us are moving because we've lost our minds, whatever. Yeah.
Oh, I saw your house on Instagram. Oh my God.
It's crazy. I know. Anyway, but yeah, so I'm moving somewhere in there, but I kept my yarn for this project in my book out like separate from the mover stuff because I was like, don't take this. I'm going to need it.
Good. Well, I hope I never have to move again.
When we do the swatch, we also want to wash it, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. I have another horror story from that. Please wash your swatches. Yeah, because, well, one thing the gauge can change. It probably won't on this yarn because it's not superwash. It's not over processed, but it could. Also, the feeling of it changes. So you might think it's too stiff and it might soften up when you wash it, or you might think it's good and then when you wash it, it feels limp. So definitely wash the swatch and just let it dry. You don't have to like pin it or stretch it or anything, but wash it, let it dry, and then feel it again and measure it again. Yeah, because you want to know both. You want to know if the gauge changes when you wash it for sure. I don't think it will on this yarn, but there's the physics of knitting and the magic of knitting, and gauge is kind of in the magic of knitting side.
Yeah, and also, Chloe, if you run out of yarn, you can always use your swatch. You can unknit it and use it.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. But it's always so scary to use a special yarn. You're like, no, I want to be on the final project.
Yeah. I think we should have more than enough yarn on this. The only thing is, depending how you arrange your colors, and we'll talk about this more as we go, and you can see it in some of the sweaters. Some of them use like the main color for the neckband. Some use the contrasting color for the neckband. If you use up more or less of one color, and say you have no marled left, well, you can use the white or the dyed solid for the neckband. That's mainly the only thing that I could foresee happening, unless you decide to make your sweater 2 sizes larger than what you ordered. Then you might run into a problem.
Another question, is there any reason why you can't do this as a top down, or is it just traditionally done as a bottom up?
It's traditionally done as a bottom up. Yep. And I don't know why. I don't like making top-down sweaters. Yeah, I do know why, I think. Because like on the yoke, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I like things that get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it goes faster and faster as you go. I don't know. I've never really gotten into top-down sweaters, but you definitely can do the yoke sweater as a top-down. Just like you would start with your neck, and then you would increase instead of decreasing it, increase, and then knit the sleeves and body down. I mean, there's no reason that it has to be bottom up. Traditionally, it is bottom up. I don't know why those traditional things were done that way. It's interesting the way people made up things. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Are we locked up? Okay, so
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, there. Okay, good. When at the beginning towards the video, you said that we should have 3 different colors, correct? Like
Yes.
There's the main color, and then there's
the main
an
color,
off-white. There's an off-white. What should
So
the
there's the
third
main
color
color.
be?
So your main color is this. Most of you have it
Yes.
dyed. So it'll be
Yes.
either red and orange and gold or blue and purple, and right? Okay. There's also
Mine's blue and purple.
some solid white that's dyed the same color as this. So if you
I
have
don't
a blue
have
and
that.
purple like this, you should also have. Really? Okay. So what I need you to do is count up the skeins you have and email me, and we can make sure that you have everything you need to have. Because you should have, like, say, I don't know what it is. I'm making this up, but say 10 skeins of this, 3 skeins dyed without the
White.
gray in it, and then 2 or 3 skeins of white.
Right.
So I want to make sure you have all of your yarn. So please email me with a count of what you have. And if you want to take a picture of it, that's fine, but not required. And we will figure it out.
Okay. Sounds good. I got it.
I do
That
have
answers that question.
I do have some more yarn here. Yeah, good. Send me a picture and a list of what you have if you think you don't have the right thing. I said on the darker ones that are blue and purple, you might have to take it out in the sunlight to see the difference because that marled, shows up less on those really dark colors. I do have more yarn here.
Oh.
That's undyed, so I can, dye to match if you need something, or if some emergency, or if a couple skeins. I have some that's dyed and some that's undyed. So if something got left out of your box, we'll fix it. If you decide you don't want to do this color neck and you ran out of that color, we can get you another skein. So we're good on all of that. I have a whole box of both the marled and the solid yarn here as a backup, and it's not going anywhere till you guys are all done knitting. Then if
Fabulous.
it's still there, I might use it for something else, but it's reserved for you for the meantime.
Okay, one more stupid question. When you say moral, what does that mean? A moral yarn?
Oh, marled, M-A-R-L-E-D. Can you see my picture here? Can you see me in the picture?
Yes.
This has 2 strands of white and 1 strand of gray plied together. So the plain white yarn has 3 strands of white, but the marled has 2 strands of white and 1 strand of gray. So the only difference of it is that it's more heathery looking. It's the same weight yarn, the same, of course, the gray yarn comes from different sheep than the white yarn, but that's the only difference. It's all natural colors.
Okay.
Okay.
You're probably right then with the,
and I
with
know
the green and the blue and the purple. Maybe I need to take it outside.
Yeah. See, because okay, here's the orange one. You can still see it, right? You can clearly see the gray against the orange. But when you look at the dark colors of the blue and the purple, like in this particular part, it shows up to me, but it might not to you, depending on your lighting. And in this part, it's almost impossible to see.
Okay.
So, and then, because all the yarn have different shades. So you might need to take it in sunlight. But anyway, if you're not sure, shoot me an email. Tell me how many skeins you have, because we want to make sure you have the, adequate yarn.
Fabulous. You're awesome.
Thank you. we want to have fun and succeed, right? That's what we're all here about. So
I also took your book and had it spiral bound. It's so much easier to let it sit flat.
A good idea.
Oh, that's cool. Like, did you take it to a copy shop or
Here, I'll show you what I did.
Cool.
This is what I did to it. I had it spiral bound and it lays flat now.
Ooh, where did you do that? Because I would love to go do that.
I went to an office supply store here that we have in Michigan called Staples.
Okay.
Yeah, Staples does it.
I'm sure Office Max will do it. A lot of printing shops can do it for you. I only paid $4.25.